Hi and welcome to the video tarot forecast for the next 4 weeks, roughly over the time of December. But it's worth bearing in mind that, of course, readings tend to have an influence several weeks, sometimes months, sometimes even years past the time that they are being spoken about. It's just that there's a focal point of several weeks now where things tend to get active around the 3 cards that I'm going to be drawing. So I think it's always worth bearing in mind that when we do a reading like this, it's worth seeing it in context with the readings that have come before, and then also in context with any readings that come afterwards as well. So I'm not entirely sure why I'm saying that yet. It may be something specifically to do with the cards that I've yet to draw, because I've shuffled but I haven't yet drawn, so we'll see. First of all, a couple of apologies. The first one is that we have a building site going on in the house next door that's getting renovated, and there seems to be a lot of digging and trucks reversing and all kinds of things like that. So if there's anything that encroaches in on the reading, I'm sorry, I can't do much about that. And the other one is that my cat may have encroached on the reading as well, because he hates having the door closed on him, and he has been sitting outside the door meowing for the last 5 minutes. So it may well be that he decides to get active again. So just before I draw the cards, a recap of the 3 cards that I'm going to be drawing in terms of positions and meaning. The card on the left is going to be the foundational card, so this is the card that we go in with. This is something that we're bringing into the present day, something that is significant and is going to be remaining active and will have an influence on and be influenced by the card at the center, which is the current weather. So it's a kind of inner and outer weather report as to how that current weather then interacts with the foundation. A sort of alchemical process between the two. And then the final card is the tool card, the card that gives you something that you can use, something that you can apply, a way of approaching the other 2 cards so that you have some sense of agency in it. And it's not necessarily about control. This is not really about controlling a reading, but rather it's a participatory card. So in other words, how can I engage with this reading? How is it that I can bring myself as fully as possible into these readings and not see myself as simply as some kind of static recipient of the information? More like a participant in a play. You're not the audience. You are both the audience and the actors on the stage as well. So I'm going to draw the cards now. I feel like from the 3 separate piles that I've created, there needs to be one from each. I'm going to turn them over one by one, as I always do. So this card is the foundational card, and it is the 10 of Swords. That has happened before. The 10 of Swords has come up before. I think it might be worth going back and having a look at that. In fact, I'm pretty sure it has. My apologies if it hasn't, but I think it has. So this is foundational. The bad news is it's the 10 of Swords, and the good news is it's the 10 of Swords, because the 10 of Swords really speaks about a bottoming out of something. Something has reached a point of intensity, and it is now ready to clear. So swords, mental processes, the mind, the intellect, anything that's going on up here. 10 of Swords, as you can see, is anything that really reflects the imagery there. So it is obsession. It is fear that goes into a sort of sense of outrageous fear where things become, as you see, fragmented. There is a feeling of things being off kilter, of being distorted, and that's exactly what it is. When the mind takes over to the extent that it does in the 10 of Swords, then there is inevitably distortion. And that distortion can feel entirely real, by the way. There is absolutely no point in saying to somebody who's going through the 10 of Swords, oh, it's all in your mind, because as most of us know, that's the foundation to the reality that we experience. So the 10 of Swords is nothing that you can control. It's nothing that you need to think yourself out of. It's not your fault. It just simply is. It may be an experience internally. It may be an experience that's happening in the world around you. If it is happening in the world around you, then it will also have a connection inside. really there isn't much separation between what's going on outside and inside, so it will invariably speak to both states. And it could be that a particular drama has reached its zenith. It has played out. There may be catastrophizing, not necessarily catastrophe, but catastrophizing, worst case scenarios that are coming up in your mind. It may be the ending of something, and that ending may have been painful. It may be a fear that you're losing your mind or losing your grip on a situation or on your sense of reality. It could be that, I'm just trying to think of other things, a belief system that is dismantling or disintegrating around you, a situation that you are living in your environment that has really got to a point of no return in terms of, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. I finally see it for the insanity that it is, and now I need to get out. I need to do something about this. And in fact, it's actually not even needing to do something about it. It's being done. It is absolutely working itself out. So it's and because this is the foundational card, this is something that you really that you will probably be aware of. If you're not aware of it, then think of the 10. I know it's not a particularly subtle card in terms of its imagery, but think of the 10 in terms of something that then is more subtle, as in something that is probably more internal. It may be something that you need to open your eyes to a little bit more. And but because it's foundational, this is not what you're moving into. It's essentially what you're shifting through and out of. But it is definitely flavoring what it is that we are moving into now. So the way that the next card, or what the next card is going to have an element of the Ten of Swords about it, in terms of the Ten of Swords being something that may be directly responsible for the next card, or in some way connected to it. At the very least, it will be connected because there will be a mindset, i.e. the Ten of Swords, that is that's really colouring what it is that is now going to be sort of taking its place, or coming up from the background and into the foreground. So we've got the Ten of Swords as the foundational card. As always, if you have any questions about this, or if you want to check in with me privately, then please just email. It may be that you need a clarification, or it may just simply be that you'd like to talk a little bit more about what it is that the Ten of Swords means for you. So foundational is this, and then the current weather that we're shifting into is an entirely different card. So I'm going to show these together. So you've got the Ten of Swords as the foundation, and then you've got the Nine of Cups, which is happiness in this deck. The imagery couldn't be more different, and yet there is actually a parallel between the imageries. You can see the conglomeration of faces and breasts and eyes being replaced by this spiral, and in the Nine of Cups, and then the overarching swords and that very heavy horizon in the Ten of Swords, then being replaced by this kind of collage of hearts and patterns. So there you can see. So it's almost as if there is this shift that's happened, or that is going to happen, or that is being invited for you to make happen as a result of the Ten of Swords. It may be that the Ten of Swords, having been this collapse of something, then paves the way for this clarity or a lightness of spirit to come through. It may be that really the ending of something and the pain of it, because the tens being the last card in the suit is the end of the line in terms of something, then means that there is this palette of different colours that you can choose from in the Nine of Cups. The Nine of Cups, from an idiomatic point of view, is often referred to as the wish card. So there's something here about, there are two things actually. I think that there is something about what it is that you want, What is it that you want based on what it is that you've just had? Given the fact that you've had a very specific perspective in the Ten of Swords, what is it that you now want in the Nine of Cups? Because that very specific perspective can often act as a kind of contrast. This is what I do not want. Or who knows, this is, I want more of something that I've experienced there. It may have been peripheral, or it may be as a result of the Ten of Swords, but it's a way of choosing. It's a way of choosing what you want. I think that, though, the second thing is something that is a little bit more subtle, but I think it's worth bearing in mind, is that sometimes when we go through something like the Ten of Swords, which can often be an internal process of thoughts that have become oppressive to the point of view that they cannot be contained anymore, that they almost reveal themselves for what it is that lies underneath, and that's normally an emotion or a feeling, pain, grief, sorrow, fear, all of those things, that really... what can happen is that we can say, that's too much, I never ever want to feel that again, and therefore instead of grieving fully or grieving properly, or doing a mindful autopsy of what it is that's happened, without catastrophizing, without going back into it, but being able to sift through things, which may take some time. I think that sometimes what can happen is that we can want to fly out of that. We can want to escape that by wishing for something else. Very often, though, what will happen is that we will tend to wish for something, we think it's completely different, and then we actually get sucked right back in. So as you can see here, there's the vortex of the Nine of Cups, and I think that it can either be that kind of vortex that takes you into a different place in a mindful, heart-based way, or a place of kind of wish fulfillment where the wish is anywhere but here. Please take me anywhere but here, which of course lands you right back to the place where you didn't want to be. So I think that there's an implicit warning, and this is where the subtlety of the Nine of Cups comes in. It's be careful what you wish for. So really there is wish fulfillment, there is a lightening of spirit. Perhaps it is really about fully embracing the feeling of something, which then enables you to transform it or to be able to experience something new. It is by going into the feelings that then things are able to shift into a different state, rather than avoiding the feelings or using the mind to try and get into the heart, which is back in swords territory, trying to think your way into feeling better. Actually, some of the ways of feeling better is simply to be with what it is that's going on, bearing in mind that because it's the Ten of Swords, what is going on has really reached that point. It's happened. Without actually doing down the Nine of Cups, because the Nine of Cups can be an entirely powerful transporting card, it's also about holding lightly to what it is that's actually going on, because as soon as you grasp, again, back into swords territory, I really must have this, or I really must get away from that, I never want this to happen again. Can you hear that? Must, want. It's mind-based, it's intellect-based, whereas with the Nine of Cups, it's heart-based. This is about vulnerability. And I think that then the idea of being vulnerable in what it is that we have experienced, as painful as it is, that decision to open our hearts and to be with that is the transforming principle, rather than the desire to move away from something. The moving away from something and the shifting happens by itself, and change in it is inevitable. One particular state never lasts permanently. The Ten of Swords won't last permanently, neither will the Nine of Cups. But to use the Nine of Cups then in its true way, which is that expression of heart. And 9, again, it's a number towards the end of the cup suit. It's not the final one. The 10 of Cups is really that idea of integration, of being able to marry it's that inner family, which can also be expressed in an outer sense of family, but to be able to marry that in a way that then you can leave that behind because it's been integrated and then shift into the next thing. And actually implied in that, if you go from 9 of Cups to 10 of Cups, then you shift over into the Ace of Swords, which is the next card in the minor arcana. So you go back to a swords, the purity or the clarity of the swords card, where the 10 of Swords is this complete confusion of where the mind has been allowed to run away with itself. The Ace of Swords is the return to clarity. It's the return to that sense of simplicity, of knowing, of absolutely simply knowing something. It's the card of insight. And so I think that what is implied here is that there is the potential for insight if what is resisted is the need to fly away from what has happened, rather to rest into the heart. And that motion of resting into the heart will automatically draw you into the center of the card. And that center of the card is really reflective of one's own center. And in that center lies the creative possibility of something else emerging from this. And paradoxically, that something else wouldn't emerge if you hadn't have gone through the experience, or you are not, if you're not still going through the experience of the 10 of Swords. So I'm going to hold those two cards up together again, because it is worth seeing how connected they are, really. And no doubt you'll see some parallels as well for yourself in the imagery. So it's transformation, but it's transformation that disengages the mind. The mind got you into trouble here, and perhaps the trouble was entirely necessary in order to bring something more through. And here's your tool card. So the final card is the card where you get not simply to sit in the audience and look at what's happening on stage, but it's the moment that you get invited up onto the stage and you can participate in the two cards in a way that gives you agency. Major Arcana card, the Lovers. This is really about, the Lovers is a complex card. So there are several things about it. First of all, it's a card of the beginnings of integration. It's the card of otherness, and the card then by extension of togetherness, because it's that longing or yearning for the other in the other person that then, or the other thing or the other state that allows this marriage eventually to take place. And if you think about the Lovers then in terms of the two cards, the 9 of Cups and the 10 of Swords, and those two opposites, then it's that potential of experiencing the opposite, or finally coming face to face with the opposite in a way that then invites a journey of transformation that comes from that. So that's part of the Lovers. It is it's the part of becoming human, really, of this stepping out of the idea of me, and then understanding that there is a we in this, and that's really the art of becoming human, because what is human about us is really our sense of relatedness, relatedness to other, relatedness in terms of parts of ourselves, but we are nothing without the other, and therefore the Lovers is the first card where there are two people or two entities involved. Remember, the Lovers is a major arcana card. It is an archetype. It's a pure archetype. How it shows up for each of us is a matter entirely of our own individual experience of it. We will only ever experience it in part. And so to be able to speak of the Lovers, I can only speak theoretically. This is you engaging with the Lovers in a way that feels meaningful to you, or to allow the Lovers to engage through you and come through you into the world in its own particular way. And that way may be quite literal, and it may be very subtle. It may be both. But really, so the Lovers also implies, and this is the other meaning, choice. So the choice about what it is to engage with, because when there is just one, there is no choice. But when it comes to two, then you reach duality, and then you're moving into complexity. And then complexity necessitates the idea of choosing. The idea of choosing one thing over another, and perhaps, there's more than one choice. So the Lovers leads into this idea of this state of bliss, of oneness, then shifts into the idea of embodied separation, and then there's that choice that comes in. So what is it that you choose? Throughout all of this, it may be choosing between these two things. It may be more complex than that. It may be that these two experiences then leads you to a greater sense of yourself, or a complexity in your life, which then choices extend from that. The more that I work with Jung, and because I'm doing a master's in Jungian studies, the more I understand that these pure archetypes, and the ones that really are in the majors, are much more difficult to get to than we think they are sometimes. So I would encourage you to dialogue with yourself around the Lovers, to do a little bit of exploration into the Lovers. I mean, maybe go and do some reading about the Lovers and what it means, because there will be something that you hit upon for yourself that feels meaningful. You may not even know why it is that it's meaningful to you. And knowing why isn't necessarily the thing that you need to do. It's just simply to engage with the exploration of what the archetype means for you. And when something feels meaningful, and it doesn't necessarily give itself up to you straight away, and you can't necessarily explain it, then just you can acknowledge the fact that it's meaningful. Maybe you don't know anything else more about that, and maybe it will reveal itself more as things go. Maybe it is that reveals itself in the point of the Ace of Swords, which is that return to insight. But in the meantime, I would say that given the fact that you've got the Nine of Cups here as the current weather, and then the tool that you use as the Lovers, it's what you are working with here is not mind-based. By all means, when I say research, obviously you use your mind, but it's not necessarily trying to solve. It's a much more expansive form of exploration, where you don't necessarily need to have the answers. It's the exploration itself that's the thing. That's exactly what it is. And it's the same with the Nine of Cups. It's the experience of resting in on your heart with all of the feelings that come up, the complexity of the feelings that come up. Nines are complex. They are not simply about feeling good. I know that the Nine of Cups here is called happiness, but I think that we need to expand what our sense of happiness is, because the Nine of Cups holds all of the Cups cards before it, and there are many different states that we move through. And maybe true happiness is really only something we reach when we understand that our heart can get broken, and that we can feel confused, we can feel bored, we can feel disillusioned, we can feel angry, we can not know what's going on. And then resting in on that heart then eventually leads us into that insight. And the Lovers there is your power to choose, but it is also the power of understanding that there is an otherness to something else, or someone else, or a situation, that there can maybe stand there in its otherness and not necessarily need to be solved. This is the beginning of an alchemical process. If it is two people or a situation where you are engaging with something else outside you, or if it's an internal situation, maybe it's something about the mystery of what's going on, and that it is your heart that leads you through the mystery. I'm going to leave it at that. It's quite an esoteric or out there reading. I know that we are working with some complex cards, and we're working with cards that where it's very much the mind is being shown to be not necessarily the place where you work things out. So by all means, ask questions. As I said, you can message me directly, and I will leave that with you. And I wish you a wonderful festive season, however you celebrate it, whether you celebrate it. And I will be back with a New Year reading at the beginning of January. Take good care of yourselves, and goodbye.